Good evening and welcome to All for United, the women's football chat show. Got lots of interesting topics tonight to chat to. I've got three guests. I've got Gareth as always. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad, thanks. And join us as well tonight. We've got Elsie and Matt. How are you both doing?
Good, thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, not too bad, yeah.
Fantastic. So tonight's show then, a little bit of everything, as I mentioned. We've got player mindset, we've got mentality, we've got nutrition, we've got rehab, we've got fitness. I'm going to talk about goalkeeper and goalkeeper training as well in women's football. So I think we'll start on the mentality side. I'll start we'll go from a fitness and physio point of view, Matt, and then obviously Elsie will link you in as well. I think the first thing I want to talk about, and certainly we've had sort of questions and viewers have asked, is obviously with your job, Matt, and working closely with players, the first thing that was sort of asked from like a mental point of view is sort of when you're doing your rehab, educating players around injuries. So, for example, taking into consideration their medical history, and then once they've been injured, sort of strengthening the body and really understanding their injury. Do you want to just sort of talk to me a little bit about that in terms of what you're doing on that topic?
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head of trying to educate everyone that I've sort of got in the room at any point. Obviously, going through their injury history is a big part of the work I started with. Made sure that I got sort of round the team and said, right, what have you had previously? Is there anything that you sort of struggle with? What in terms of, say, your ankle, if you had previous with that, ensure that they're doing everything they can to keep that going. And obviously always have that in the back of the mind that could flare up at any point. But then, like you said, just making sure that they're doing everything they can to protect the other areas as well, the training outside of the football, trying to get in the gym, trying to remain like mobile and sort of fit for the game, really.
Yeah. Gareth?
Yeah, I think the important thing, obviously, as well, is particularly kind of for longer injury layoffs, keeping that kind of positivity throughout there and kind of not slipping back and kind of struggling to see a light, potentially, a return date or a light at the end of the tunnel. And, there's been some really long-term injuries this year with Jordan and Eve. How do you kind of keep their positivity through those long-term injuries?
I think for me, it's just important to break it down into a smaller amount. So it's not like saying, right, you're not going to play for 6 months now. It's sort of breaking it down. So, for example, I tend to use plyometric training with them at a certain stage. It's like building them up to that, so they're feeling as though they're being a bit more active throughout the session. Every now and then we might come outside and do a session outside, and just saves being stuck inside, sort of in the same four walls, and just sort of take it in stages really, and try and give them something to aim for, and have that on a smaller time frame than sort of saying, right, well, there's no game time for 6 months now, and leaving them sort of lingering on that thought really.
I like that, the idea of sort of working in small steps. I think that does help mentality in general, like from a psychology point of view. Trying to sort of, if you've got a goal that's way in the future, I think it does affect mentality a lot, because they know that it's way off, and they're not sort of achieving anything in the short term. And I think it's good that you're sort of working in those short bursts, because then they feel like they're actually getting somewhere. You've achieved, it might only be a small goal, but you've achieved it in a short space of time, so then you work towards the next goal. I think that's a good way of looking at it, rather than going way in the future, and seems sort of out of sight almost, doesn't it, for some of the players?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's important, sort of goal setting. I'll let you sort of chat on that in a sec, Matt. But another thing I wanted to sort of link in, and I know it happens at FC, was obviously you'll sort of take your players in a group, whereas sometimes we've seen clubs take players individually. So what I wanted to ask was, obviously, I'm assuming it does the sort of group setting when you have a few players in together really help? Because obviously, we can link in goal setting here. You've sort of got each other to bounce off, haven't you? Do you want to just sort of touch on that and goal setting as well? Sort of like group work, if you like.
Yeah, it's the exact same thing. It's the team environment, isn't it? It's keeping the girls sort of together, not having them isolated. I think obviously that can cause some problems if you've got someone who is on their own for a long period of time. It can sort of make them feel a bit not like an outcast, but that kind of thing where everyone else is training regularly and they're stuck inside on their own. So I think although it's not ideal having multiple people injured, but having them in a group, it's better for the ones that are there because they can have a chat. They can obviously put the music on. Some tastes are obviously better than others. But yeah, it's sort of a nicer environment for them to be in. So they're not stuck on their own, racking their own brain with the thoughts sort of thing.
Yeah.
And some psychology can come in there as well. Like we see, so I see kind of things like teaching as well, where when you've got a group of people that are kind of working towards a similar aim, then they're there and they can motivate each other and almost there to kind of hold each other to account as well. Whereas if there's one person on their own that's isolated, it can be relatively easy to kind of let those standards slip. Whereas when there's a group of you kind of motivate each other and you hold each other to account in order to kind of get what you need to get done. So yeah, I can easily see how that would kind of translate as well into a rehab and physio perspective.
Yeah, I remember looking at similar sort of stuff to this in uni when I did sports psychology, and we were looking at the difference in a person's self-belief dependent upon whether they're in a team or an individual sport. And you found, like looking at studies, you did find that sports people that took part in team sports had a lot more belief in their own ability as well as obviously the group, but it did increase the belief in their own ability, because I think you're right, the team sort of G's each other on, doesn't it? And you feel like you've got someone on your side. So yeah, I think that sort of comes into it a little bit as well, that team of rehab people.
Yeah, I think that's massive, because obviously I taught a lot of tennis, and obviously for the majority of most people's sort of tennis playing career, it's like individual unless they're playing doubles. But I mainly concentrated on singles, and I must admit, like coaching that and sort of working with people and trying to help people when it's just you on your own or them playing on their own, especially after a defeat or an injury, it's a very lonely place. But something I wanted to sort of follow on from, and again, obviously this will be more relevant to you, Elsie, was obviously once a player's coming back, in terms of like mentality and psychology, how do you sort of look to manage it on the pitch? Because obviously there's that sort of, there can be that barrier, can't, where people say, well, I want to be careful that I don't overdo it, or I'm not going to go into a tackle because I don't want to get injured. How do you sort of deal and manage with that without sort of, I guess, pushing them too far too quick?
Yeah, I think that the main thing is to listen to them, because they know when they're ready. And obviously Matt can tell sort of us coaches and us managers, yeah, they're ready, because from a medical perspective they are. But it's also about listening to the player as well, because if they don't feel ready, there's no point putting them in. There's no point asking them to play, because they're not going to be in it mentally, are they, if they don't feel ready? And that might lead to them making mistakes. Their confidence might be low and things like that. And then it sort of risks re-injury as well if you're putting them in when they're not ready. So yeah, I think it's obviously listening to Matt in the first place, knowing when they're medically ready, but listening to them. I think we've had it at FC a few times this season when Matt said, yeah, they're ready to go, but the player themselves has sort of said, like, I don't feel up for it yet, like, don't start me because I'm not feeling confident. And me and James have listened to that, and you don't put them in because it's what's best for them, and you sort of maybe gradually build it up, get them doing a lot more training. Once they're feeling comfortable at training, then go sort of say, right, do you fancy 10 minutes even, and just build it up to a place that they feel comfortable in. I think that's the most important thing, really.
Yeah, and I think as well, kind of with confidence, is it's so much more damaging to kind of go in and play them for a prolonged period of time. They think they've had a really poor game, that they've and that's going to kind of knock the confidence even more and can set them back even further. So by being able to kind of take those smaller, more, like incremental steps, similar to the rehab, kind of looking at a short-term goal, just kind of getting back on the pitch and running around in the grass and feeling it, and then build from there is so important, because every player is going to be different, and whilst they may be kind of medically fit, the personality is going to play a big part in it as well. And you're going to have some players that are going to kind of be ready to go off the bat and be super motivated to go in, whereas others who perhaps kind of have a slightly different personality and are going to kind of really want to egg it in slowly and then get a feel for it before they're ready to jump back in. So I can definitely kind of see how that would happen.
Yeah. I'm going to come back to this with this, Matt. Obviously, we're talking a lot about sort of psychology for rehab, and obviously you mentioned about sort of talking and getting to know the player. What's it like then in terms of like sort of Gareth mentioned then about some being too keen to get back too quick and some maybe taking it cautiously, because obviously that'll be something that you'll have to work with. But how do you maybe, I don't know if keep a lid on it's the right word. Obviously you'll have a conversation, but how do you sort of manage that? Because obviously I can imagine, certain players will be like, I want to get back, I'm ready, when actually you might have assessed them and they might not quite be where you want them to be. How do you sort of balance the two of them between not rushing it and obviously trying to carefully encourage somebody that is fully ready and has maybe passed all the relevant fitness tests?
I think for me, it's about including them in what's going on, and making sure that they understand what they're doing and why they're doing. So something I quite like to do is I'll sort of regularly assess them. So we'll go through the same things that we did when the initial injury came, and then they can see themselves like, oh, I remember when you did that last time and it was an 8 out of 10 on the pain and now it's only a 4. So they can see that the work they've been doing, although it might not seem very much to them, they can see that it's been working and the time off sort of paid its due. And then I think it's just about, it's almost like a needs analysis of saying, right, I know you want to get back into this, but we need to tick these boxes before you can do that. And I think sort of breaking it down and explaining to them that you need to do this, this, and this before you can go and train, they sort of pen that frustration a little bit and go, oh, okay, that's fair enough, I know. And then they'll work towards those goals that you put in place. So for me, I think the importance is just educating them and telling them, look, this is where you're at. We need you to be here before you can move on to this. And they go, all right, okay, that's fair enough. But then, like you said, obviously there's some that are more cautious, and it's just the other way around. It's saying, look, to be able to do this, you need to be here. And at the moment you're here, so you're past where you really need to be. And just explaining to them that it's a slow process. You can go in at your pace. You don't need to jump straight back into a full training session. You can do a half and half, or just take it at your own pace, and making sure that they understand where they're at, as opposed to just being pushed in or pulled out at any point, really.
Yeah. Gareth, do you want to link in anything there, anything on confidence maybe as well?
Yeah, is there kind of a different approach that you take for some players that kind of get numerous injuries? Because I imagine that it can be quite kind of a knock to the confidence and a setback kind of mentally as well as physically, to go through an injury layoff, get back on the pitch, and then find yourself kind of back inside with you, a month or so later. Is there anything kind of separate that you'll do with players like that, as opposed to those that are just on like a longer layoff?
I think for that kind of situation, it's just important to talk to them first of all, and sort of say, look, what kind of situation are you looking at now? Is it a process of we try and get you back when you're ready, or is it a process of we take that little bit more time to make sure that everything's absolutely bulletproof before we put you back where you need to be? And just sort of understanding the situation of obviously the whole aspect of their rehab and where their mind is at. If it's a time where they need a bit of reassurance and they might need the time off the pitch to sort of get the confidence back and get back into everything, then that's fine. They can take that extra time with me. It's not a problem. But if you've got someone who comes off and they're fit and ready and raring to go through the rehab and to get back on the pitch, then it's just about sort of having the talk with them and saying, look, what kind of situation are you in? Where are you at the moment? And going from there, really putting a plan into place from there.
I think you've done that a bit this season, haven't you, really? Like, where we've got obviously a few players that have had recurring injuries. And I know, like Matt mentioned to me, that he's had the conversation with them, sort of saying, do you want to push it and come back as quickly as possible? Or would it be better for you mentally to sort of say, right, season's done, let's focus on getting fully fit for next season? And I think that's a big part of it as well, is how do they feel mentally ready to, are they ready to push? Like, right, let's go for it. Let's try and get you done before the season, like back before the season's done. Or are you at a different stage of your mentality now, saying like, look, it's been too many times this season. Let's call this season to an end now and focus on getting back ready so that I can have a full season next season without injuries. So I think that's a big part of it, as well as looking at sort of making a decision between sort of himself and the player and saying, right, what are we doing? Are we pushing, or are we just going to hold and sort of play it safe?
See where they're that's at. Spot on, really. It's just about having the conversation with them and making sure they understand the reasons why we're doing things as well, to be honest. Is about going through the protocols, going through what we need to do, and then getting them to see, look, we've got 6 weeks till the end of the season. Do you push for that last game and potentially not be right? Or do you sort of have a minute with yourself and say, right, okay, I've still got another 5, 6, 7 seasons, so it's not a problem for me to miss a few games. I think especially with the stage of the season we're in now, we're coming up to literally the last month of the year now. So I think it's going to be a big push by all of the team. And it's just about making sure that they're doing it for the right reasons and not just thinking, I need to be back, and then making it a longer thing and missing sort of half of pre-season or what have you.
Yeah, I think that's important though, because obviously what I'm getting from this is obviously a lot of communication and planning is massively key, because I think without that, and again, you know, I've come across instances and people spoke to other clubs, it doesn't always happen. And I think that's the one thing, like you said there, you know, you kind of, I suppose it's hard for both of you really to kind of maybe find a common ground, because again, if you've got players that are insistent on pushing and they're not right, like you say, is it worth it for a game or two or for 30 minutes of, like, say, the last game of the season, when realistically, you know, another few weeks or a month or, you know, 2 months of rehab and getting everything right and strengthening the injury or around the area is probably going to be beneficial, because then, like you say, you can go into pre-season sort of right and on sort of similar level to everybody else, I suppose.
Yeah.
Elsie, I wanted to come to you because obviously you played as well, and I wanted to sort of talk about player care in general. So obviously you can sort of link this into playing or coaching now as well, just as a general. But what do you think of it in the women's game? Because again, I think of, like, for example, Liverpool and WSL when they were there, and the amount of players that left because they were unhappy and because they didn't feel valued and looked after. What would you say on that? Like I say, sort of broadly in the women's game, because it's great at some places, but it's not at others.
Yeah, no, I think you've sort of said it spot on there. Like, at some places, I feel it's great. I know a lot of girls that have been at academies. I know a lot of girls that have gone on to sort of play, and they play now senior football at a professional level. And I think every club is different, whether it's sort of in your WSL or whether it's lower down. I think I know a girl that she went off at quite a young age to one academy, and thought it was absolutely amazing, did really, really well there. As she got older, she switched over to another local academy, and she only stayed there for a season, and she said it was absolutely awful. She didn't feel respected there. She didn't feel like she was treated well, and she ended up going back to the original academy. So I think no matter what level you're playing at women's football, there's just such a big disparity between clubs. Even sort of at our level at FC, I feel like, not being biased, but I feel like FC as a club look after us. I feel like the team, we all look after each other. We've got things like a physio, and I feel like a club like FC do get looked after. But there's clubs higher up that I feel like don't, from stories I've heard and from things I've seen personally as well. So yeah, I'm not sure what the reasons are for the disparity, and but yeah, I know it's there. When I played myself, I played in Tier 3, and our club, to be honest, didn't really look after us at all. We were in Tier 3, we didn't even have a physio in our team. That's how sort of poor it was. I ended up actually getting injured myself and stopped playing football altogether. We didn't have a physio that could see me. I didn't know what really the problem was or how to rehab it or anything like that. But then you look at FC, that's a league below that, and we do get looked after really well. So, yeah, I'm not sure what the reasons are for it, but there's definitely huge differences between clubs. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Gareth, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of that is going to be a financial thing. You know, you look at Liverpool, for example, a couple of years ago, kind of just gave up on their women's team, and they'd won league titles before and saw them slip down the pyramid. So, yeah, I think there are clubs that just kind of see it as of just financial outlay and think, oh, we'll kind of just put the bare minimum to this. And some clubs will kind of look to save face, whereas others will really invest in the team and kind of put the team to the forefront of what they do. And I think FC do that, especially this season, kind of moving on and playing inside of Broadhurst Park and not just on the 3G outside. It kind of gives that extra feeling of kind of being a part of the kind of one club mentality. And you can definitely kind of see with FC that there is that attitude there. And with kind of other clubs, it's probably not there as prevalently.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like FC is one of the best clubs I've ever seen in women's football, to be honest, in terms of the men's support for the women's team and the club as a whole support for the women's team. It's definitely one of the best that I've ever seen. I don't think you see the men's team and the club supporting women as much as FC. Definitely not.
Yeah, and from your point of view, Matt, obviously we're talking there about sort of physios and not every club having one. How do you find it from your point of view then on that? Like, obviously, you know, you can probably relate to teams that FC have played against, but how would you view maybe the current situation on physios? Because I think for me, like, you know, it's one of them things. I don't understand how people sort of, I don't know what's the word, like wing it, but how do you feel in terms of that? Just in general, like sort of without getting yourself into trouble.
Yeah, I think it's quite an odd one because as we've seen this season, there's some teams that just have staff members or players as the physio, and it's sort of like so frustrating from my point of view because we get to put in so much work through the week and look after the players and sort of have the responsibility of taking the care and making sure that they're right. And then opponents are just sort of almost put in danger of just being left on the field without any treatment. There was a game this season where a player went down with a head injury and they just sat there and their excuse was, oh, well, the ref didn't wave us on. And I'm just sort of sat there thinking, well, it's a head injury. There's a massive thing in the whole of football at the moment about head injuries.
Yeah.
And you're just not looking after your players. And it's not even, I don't think you can really blame it from a financial aspect because there's thousands of graduates out there who haven't got a role. All right, they've got to contact you, but you can also put a thing out, say, is there anyone from the local universities or things like that are needing experience? And because the roles we're trying to go for, they need the experience, and this is sort of perfect for that. It's a volunteer role. It takes a couple of days a week, and then they're just sort of the players are being left without that care on a weekend, not knowing what could happen if they do get a head injury or they do break the leg. I mean, we've seen ourselves from this season. With Eve, she had a horrible leg break, and luckily we had the physio there to sort of look after her in the meantime before the ambulance. But I dread to think how that would have been if there was no physio available and she was just left lying on the floor. It's just not a nice sort of thought, really, is it?
I can say from personal experience of that day that none of the rest of us knew what we were doing. We were all just stood in sort of like just thinking this is ridiculous. Like what do we even do? So it is good that we had those people that did. I honestly dread to think what we'd have done if they weren't there.
Yeah, I think it's massively important, but it's also frustrating because, like, from my point of view, I was at a game a few weeks ago. It was the Leicester and Everton game, and the goalkeeper got kicked in the head, and she was clearly down holding the head, and the ref was just carrying on. And I sound like a dig out refs weekly, me, but it's things like that. Like, again, it just links to like player care, doesn't it? Because obviously, with you talking there, Matt, and obviously people knowing what to do. Because I can imagine, well, I can't imagine because I've not sort of played at a high standard. But obviously, as a player as well, the first thing when you get injured is you want to know about the injury and sort of how long you're going to be out for. I can imagine would be the first couple of questions. So again, like you say, without a physio, it's just bizarre as to what happens. And again, it links into sort of player care, and I think this was something that frustrated me a few months back that got me in a little bit of trouble, shall we say, with a couple of players in a certain team. But I just think at the end of the day, like for me, and it's not even like my team, but as a whole, collectively, we need to do better, whether that's, championship, whether that's tier 3, 4, 5, 6, you know, at the end of the day, clubs have a sort of responsibility, don't they, and a duty of care to the players. So it's a little bit frustrating, and I'm sure it is, well, probably for you too, even seeing it, you know, what other clubs are hearing about it from sort of, you know, maybe past experience, that it doesn't happen everywhere. Gareth, is there anything before I move on from you?
Yeah, just kind of on the kind of safety really aspect of things. And I know that from officiating cricket that the kind of safety of players is something that's always in the forefront of your mind, especially kind of in cricket where the weather plays an impact on safety as well. You know, when it's raining, if they go in charging in to try and bowl a ball at 70, 80 miles an hour and it slips out, that can seriously injure somebody. So yeah, we're kind of taking these decisions all the time, and it's always something that should be thought about. So if that's kind of what officials are thinking, then clubs should be doing the same thing. And yeah, at the end of the day, you've got to look after your players, and it shouldn't be something that is seen as being an addition to the coaching staff. It should be seen as something that is an integral role of the backroom staff, because you know, you guys will know that, Matt, you'll communicate with the coaching team regularly over how long people are fit to come back and play for. You know, having that conversation with James, you know, the other week, you know, on the sidelines of how long these players are ready for. And I just think without that, there's so many risks. You know, not only just the rehabbing, but coming back from the injury as well. Players could come back too soon and kind of aggravate things as well.
Yeah, that's a side of it I hadn't actually really thought about. I was thinking more of on the game day of not having the assistants, but then you think about if you have got these longer term injuries where they are needing the rehab and the support, who's got this in place at the clubs, and who's doing, like, what are they doing on the training sessions? Are they just stood on the sideline and hoping that in 6 weeks their ankle will start to feel better, or have they actually got something in place to be able to help them? It's a massive disadvantage, because if anyone has as bad a season as we've had with injuries, and you've not got someone there to look after him, then you're going to be missing half a squad for 6 months of your season.
Yeah,
I think FC sort of perfectly, they're a perfect example of how important a physio is. In our women's team, the only person that gets paid is our physio. The rest of the coaching staff, we're all volunteer. Obviously, players are all volunteer. We have one paid member of staff, and that is the physio. So I think that sort of perfectly shows how important someone like a physio is to a squad. That we're sort of saying, like, it's so important that we're actually going to pay you to do it, because we feel like that's what your role deserves. So I think that sort of shows everything.
Yeah, I want to sort of go a little bit more into player welfare, because I don't know if either of you saw it, but I think there was a story probably about a good month or so ago from a player that used to be at Crawley Wasps that got an injury and basically was sort of, I think what happened was they deregistered her, and then they gave away a number to a new signing, a shirt number that is, and then this player was just like cast off. She said there was nobody in touch from the club, and this is like a third tier side. There was no guidance sort of, you know, for coming back, sort of similar to we discussed. And it was something which got, obviously, quite rightly, a lot of attention. And obviously there was a lot of things said and thrown the club's way. And I think for me, rightly so, like, you know, I think it's shocking. But I think what I want to sort of ask both of you is what do you feel in general could be maybe improved to help player welfare? And I know that might be quite broad, but I think, you know, obviously, Matt, you were talking about before about like sort of uni and finance and cost shouldn't be an issue, but I don't know who wants to go first out of you, but what can we do to maybe improve it?
I think the first thing is just making sure that all clubs have a physio. I'm not sure sort of what the actual rules are really in terms of are the league. I don't know the admin side of it, but are there league rules about physios? I don't know, but sort of if there's not, putting rules into place on clubs that you have to have a physio, whether that's paid or voluntary, you've got to have one. Even if that was just the match day thing, but having someone there for the safety of the players, yeah, it'd be great if they could be there sort of more longer term as well and doing rehab. But as a starting point, sort of put that rule in place across football and say you have to have a physio if you want to play football matches.
Yeah.
I think that's possibly a start. Obviously, sort of the higher up the club are, then sort of looking at sort of what we do at FC and saying, can we actually pay the physio to encourage someone to want to do it, to encourage someone sort of higher quality to want to do it as well, someone that's worth the money. Things like that. I think that's the starting point, really.
Is there anything from maybe sort of a mental / psychological point of view? Because again, like, you know, some players in terms of having conversations, like for example, WSL, because they got the budget, can afford psychologists, but obviously lower down, is there anything maybe that could be done there? Would that be simply a case of, again, maybe a volunteer or even just a member of staff? Because obviously sometimes players maybe feel like they can't go to coaches, maybe in fear of getting dropped, for example, if they say, oh, I'm having a bit of an off day, maybe football's the only thing that they can sort of turn to. Is there anything you feel there that maybe could be done?
Yeah, it might be worth maybe even sort of having a member of staff trained in that kind of thing, maybe like on a course or something, just having someone, whether that's a coach, whether that's the physio, because I feel like you said, maybe players don't want to go to coaches. Players might be more likely to go to the physio because they're sort of, maybe they spend more time with them. Obviously there's certain players that Matt has spent a lot of time with and is probably a lot closer to, and they might want to go to him rather than go to a coach. So maybe worth having someone in your club, whether that's physio, coach, secretary, anyone, just someone that is maybe trained in more of sort of a mentality side, a psychology side, so that there is someone there that they know they can go to if they're struggling with anything or if they need to talk about something. Might be worth having something like that. Maybe, I don't know if there is any training, but maybe even some FA training. Like they do obviously your first aid and your safeguarding and your coaching courses, but maybe within your coaching courses they could include something like that, looking at mentality of players and psychology. Might be worth.
Yeah, I agree. It's a massive sort of gap at the minute, really. Is obviously like you said, the top tiers will have the psychologists and everything available, but I think as you start to filter it down, it's where that sort of starts to lack a bit more. And obviously the players that come in, we tend to, like I said, spend a lot more time with, so we'll have a chat, and sometimes they'll feel comfortable to sort of talk about things that might be bothering them. But I think for me personally, I'd love to get into that side of it as well, and be able to help them in a proper capacity to try and obviously further their game, because at the end of the day, you can fix the foot, but if they get onto the pitch and something's still not right within the head, then they've not got that support there at the moment.
It could even be worth, a bit like what Matt was saying before, how you can get volunteer physios in from, like, you can get like university graduates, or you can get people that are in uni sort of that need work experience and stuff like that. It could even be worth finding people in uni that are doing things like sports psychology, or even just psychology in general, but that kind of thing, maybe bringing them in on some work experience as well, or getting some graduates to do some volunteer work to get themselves some experience. Something like that might be worthwhile too.
Yeah, I think it is. It's something, obviously, I know, Matt, you sort of said there about getting into it. I think it's something that's big, and obviously it can probably sort of relate to the role that you do at FC, really, can't it? Because again, I can imagine most problems, or I say problems, that's probably a bit harsh, but most sort of, most sort of things come from injury, don't they? Like mentally, like struggles, shall we say. And I think, again, it's something that football in general doesn't really tend to look at in great detail, or it's maybe done but not sort of, to a standard maybe you'd expect. I want to sort of move on to nutrition, and again, Matt, you can probably link this to sort of injury prevention and coming back, and then obviously LCU sort of jump in from like a performance and sort of on the pitch type thing. Matt, do you just want to talk us through in terms of like, well, the whole thing in terms of like, maybe recovering from an injury, or going out there and maybe working with a player, sort of advising them on sort of nutrition and diet, things like that?
Yeah, I think that's such a massive part of performance and recovery that people don't necessarily understand and think about. Is obviously everyone thinks I'll have a stretch before the game and I'll warm up properly, but realistically your preparation start in 24, 48 hours before your actual game. I think ensuring that your diet and your eating is correct for what you're doing is a massive part of your performance that unfortunately just doesn't really get recognized. And obviously sometimes it's going to be difficult for people to really put the thought and effort into it if they're busy and they've got families and things like that. But I think it's just unfortunate. It's a massive part that does get overlooked, sort of in the preparation side, and then even for the recovery, it's about refueling your body after the exercise that you've been doing. Really, I listened to a podcast a few weeks ago, and they said they after the post game meals, they just have absolutely anything they want because they're elite footballers, and then they've just sprinted for 90 minutes effectively. So the amount of energy that they've burned, it doesn't matter whether they go and eat 3 pizzas or whatever. They go through and they just refuel because the body just needs to take in the energy to be able to recover and repair for over the next few days before they start training again.
Yeah, and sort of Elsie on the field then, obviously, we're talking about nutrition and things like that. And obviously, you used to see it a lot. I remember sort of when I was younger, Rio Ferdinand, and used to be like running over for Jaffa cakes and like energy gels and things like that. Do you want to sort of maybe talk about that and performance on the pitch? Because obviously, most people know obviously it's important, but maybe people don't, like sort of Matt said before, maybe don't understand it fully, whether that's sort of a playing point of view or whether just a fan that's maybe interested in sort of that aspect of it.
Yeah, I think a big part of nutrition is that a lot of people, especially sort of as you move down the pyramid, a lot of people don't know about nutrition and what you should be eating before a game, what you should be eating after a game. I think a lot more education is needed in that, to be honest. We actually at AFC we did have a big talk about nutrition. We got sort of we got a professional in a sort of pre-season, and she talked to us about what you should be doing before a match, what you should be doing after a match, during a match, all these different things. And I remember at the time it being really, really useful, and even as sort of not a player myself anymore, I found it really useful and really interesting, and even then knowing what the players should be doing. Unfortunately, it was like 2 years ago, and I can't actually remember much of it now. So I feel like it's important to actually sort of keep going, maybe do it at the start of every season or the start of every other season, just to keep it fresh in everyone's minds, because I think you do forget, and you get new players in as well that maybe don't know. So things like that I think are really important, because then the players know how to best perform. They know that they're doing everything right. It might be even players like coming back from injury, they're everything's right in terms of like medical side, and they're doing great, they're feeling great, but there might be some issues with things like their fitness and their stamina coming back. So knowing that they're eating the right foods too, I think can be a massive help to someone. And even going back to their mentality as well, like things like that can even help. Just it's like those marginal gains, isn't it? And even something as small as knowing you're eating the right foods before a game can help you gain that confidence and put that extra little bit of your performance in, and you know you're doing something right then, don't you? Even if maybe other things aren't going quite to plan, you've got that one thing that you're doing right.
Yeah, I think as well is sort of when you look at it on a larger scale, if you've got somebody coming back from an injury that may be having a sort of slower healing rate, that's where the importance of the diet comes in, because if you're not getting the nutrients in, and if you just sat eating sort of rustlers or pot noodles or whatever, there's no nutrients in them, so you can't actually rebuild your body as fast as you need.
A couple of them at FC this season. One of the reasons they're not maybe healing as fast as they could be is to do with that.
Yeah, I think it's a massive aspect of it, that if you're not getting even just something as simple as your protein, if you're not getting your protein in, your body's not going to repair as fast as it can, because that's the whole role of the proteins is to repair and rebuild. So yeah, it's just a big aspect again, really, that is unfortunately getting left out, and something that I'd love to bring in, sort of on a larger scale. If it is a talk at the start of season and mid-season, say, look, are you doing these things? I think this is something we need to implement, and just go from there and see how the players take it. Yeah.
Gareth, I want to bring you in on this as well, because obviously thinking about this, what we've just sort of talked about, it takes me back to when I was fortunate enough to work in football and went on a tour of Man City's training ground, and that's something they do at the start of every season. They had a chat with parents to educate parents for those that were sort of young enough to not be able to cook. Then they had a chat with players that were obviously old enough. Obviously, we're talking Premier League, they'll pay for chefs and sort of cop out. But in terms of like educating people, obviously you work, in a college, and you've got sort of Man United development players there. What would you say in terms of the education side then? Because obviously, that education bit is important. Do you feel like it should happen maybe at that age level, or do you think maybe something sort of lower down and again linking it into sort of football?
Yeah, I mean, the United players are there. I don't teach them, but they're there.
They're there.
Yeah. It's something that I say to my students a lot, because we're trying to prepare them to go to university. And there are times when, we've just been speaking and they've kind of gone, well, just like stick some chicken nuggets and some chips in the oven and I'll wait 20 minutes and it'll be done. And because they're saying that they can't cook, and when they go to university, they're not sure what they're going to do. They'll just kind of live off kind of like ready meals and kind of instant food. And I've said to every single group I've taught over the last 5 years that I absolutely believe every single person can cook. If you can follow a simple instruction, which, to be fair, some of them probably can't. But if you can follow simple instructions, then you can cook. And that I'm pretty sure that I could cook like a meal with fresh ingredients in the same time it takes them to sit and wait whatever they've got in the oven to finish cooking. And I think it's just about finding that time to be able to do that. And like, people will find time in the morning to shower and take care of hygiene. So, people can find that same amount of time to kind of eat well. And granted, people have long days and they come home and they're kind of tired and maybe don't necessarily want to do that. But it doesn't need to be something that is cooking for hours and hours. There are a number of things that can be done relatively quickly, and I think it's about kind of equipping people with those skills to be able to actually realize that 10-15 minutes is all you really need to be able to cook something. And a lot of the time, by the time you've phoned a takeaway, waited 40 minutes for it to arrive and eaten it, you could have like cooked something from scratch and done whatever. So I think it's that kind of attitude around the kind of convenience of food is really interesting. I just want to kind of touch back on mentality a bit as well, kind of where we left off with the kind of psychology perspective. My degree is in psychology, teach psychology, and we have a sports psychology unit, and definitely think that people kind of we can't really coach mentality, but I think you can. And I think what we can use is there's research that looks at the personality of various different sports players, like Elsie touched on how people who play individual sports will have kind of different personalities to those that play team sports. And actually, when coaching, you can use that. If you find that your players potentially don't necessarily have the kind of same team orientation that some others do, or they're not particularly trusting of other people, or kind of these other elements of personality may be limited, well, you can use that within kind of planning and preparation of drills, where you can build that trust or that kind of team orientation and kind of implement kind of team building exercises and develop some trust in that sense. I was speaking to somebody who plays netball, and they were kind of saying that one of the things that they do when playing netball is when they're reaching over to try and block a shot, because you can't make contact, your teammate will literally hold the back of your jersey back to stop you from falling forward so you can lean further. And they were kind of saying that there's an enormous amount of trust involved there, and if that's not there, then obviously you're not going to be able to defend as well. So I think from that sense as well, and when there's kind of this potentially negative, anxious kind of mindset, there's usually always something underlying that, and it's about finding out what that underlying issue is. It's not necessarily going to be I don't want to get my foot stuck in and become re-injured. There could always be something kind of further beneath the surface than that. It could be something like they don't necessarily want to feel like they're letting teammates down by spending a longer period of time on the sidelines, so they don't want to then rush back and get re-injured. There's not always just that kind of surface level anxiety. That there can be a lot more to it. So just kind of re-emphasize the kind of importance of communication and speaking to people, and kind of having a number of different options on the team where people can go to and have those conversations, and actually kind of relieve those anxieties, because we've seen, and the research is overwhelming for the kind of positive impacts of sport on mental health. But then there's an optimum point of anxiety, and feeling nervous and anxious is good and can increase performance. But there's a point at which you become too anxious and kind of that arousal gets too high, and then performance can start to decline. And it's about managing that and trying to find that optimum levels, and communication is the best way to do that. Just then, to go back on nutrition, now I've gone off my tangent. Do you think then that being, like you say, a volunteer club where the players all have day jobs, and some may have work long hours, do shift work, do you think that makes it much more difficult to kind of implement any sort of nutritional plan? Because it's not as though you can kind of be the ones that are providing this. You can put a plan in place, but then it's down to the players to go away and kind of stick to it and have the discipline to actually do that and find the time to engage with it.
Yeah, I think that's obviously a massive sort of obstacle, that the level that we're at is at the moment. There are obviously people, like you said, that they're working all different hours. Some might be on nights and what have you. So sort of having the time or the energy to cook a decent meal on a Friday night or something just isn't at the top of the priorities, and that's absolutely fair enough. I think in a different environment, if it was a professional setting, I think you'd see a completely different sort of side to it. But like you said, people they have the jobs, they have the priorities, and that's fair enough.
Yeah, and when you're not paid to play as well, you have sort of different things that you can expect and you can't expect of the players. And if you're paying them to play, you do expect a certain level of fitness constantly and a certain level of keeping their body fueled with the right things, because you're paying them. So it's they've sort of got to do as they're told, and they've got to keep themselves at their optimum fitness level, because they're being paid to do so. And if they're not keeping themselves fit, then it's like in any job, but if you're not doing it properly, you're in trouble, aren't you? But obviously when we don't pay our players, it's hard to sort of expect them to do things like eat the right food all the time, keeping themselves fit outside of football, making sure they're doing sort of extra rehab sessions at home, making sure they're going to the gym, making sure they're even doing extra training outside of our training. You can't really expect that from them, because this isn't their job. They've got a job, and that's sort of their priority, to focus on that, because that's their living, isn't it? And there's only so much we can ask of them. So it can get hard in a setting like ours. You do find sometimes that players might be getting a little bit unfit because they're not taking nutrition or exercise seriously. And I think all we can do in our role is encourage the best we can, educate the best we can. And then sort of from there, as long as you've done your job on educating and encouraging and doing what you can at training, after that it's up to them, and they can take it or leave it. You hope that they take a lot of it on so that they can get into the team and so that they can perform at their best and help the team out. But it's sort of up to them from there on. So
I think that's the spot on, really. Is ideally for me, I'd love them to be able to get into the gym 3 times a week, as well as be doing the rehab side of it with me. But obviously, like I said, they've got other things on. They've got work. They've got. So I know, like I'm sure half of our team are teachers. There's so many of them.
yeah.
So then they've got planning, they've got prep, and it's just finding the time for them. And like I said, it's not the job at the end of the day. So that's fair enough.
Yeah, we've got players with kids and stuff as well, and it's like between work, football, and kids, where do you find the time to fit in cooking and looking after your kids, looking after your house, making sure that everything's sorted at work, and also going to the gym 3 times a week and cooking meals for you and the family. And it can get very hard. So
yeah, it's like a balance, isn't it? Because obviously we mentioned sort of higher up there, and you were sort of talking about when players are paid, and obviously I think that's one thing that they sort of can't shy out of, especially in the WSL, is that obviously they're paid to train, and then after that they might have trained for 3 hours and then they've got nothing else on because they don't work, and that's the time when obviously they can afford to do that. And I think it's sort of what I'm getting from this is like trust what's being advised and said, but obviously like you say, with some sort of leeway because of obviously the balance of just everyday life and work and away from football. And I think there's a lot to sort of consider, which again, people don't always realize that sort of, lower down and outside paid football. is the case. Gareth, I'm going to slightly go off on a different one back to your topic from before. You were sort of talking about like the team and things. I wanted to touch on team bonding, sort of linked into mentality, and obviously again, just to tie everything up. I'll come to you first, Matt. Obviously, I know earlier on in the show we talked about sort of rehabbing in groups and things, but I think from a sort of a general well-being, just overall for like everybody on the team bonding, sort of, do you want to talk to me about your sort of thoughts on that, and then Elsie can go after you?
Yeah, I think it's obviously a massive part of anything, really. No matter what sport you're playing, if it's a team sport, effectively you've all got to get on at the end of the day. You can't. I would think you can't really play to a good level with people that you don't like. It's about getting to know each other and knowing where you need to be, how they want the ball and things like that. And I think team bonding can be a massive part of showing what a team can do. Like, I think you look at Leicester a few years ago, they weren't necessarily the best team in the Premier League, but they were a unit and they stuck together and they were there for each other, covering each other's backs and everything like that. And I think activities to sort of promote this, whether you go on a big hike or you just do things together more regularly, go out for a team meal and things like that, I think it's just so important and sort of gets the players to know each other more. I think especially at the moment we've got a lot of players coming in. There's some of them a bit younger, some of them are sort of obviously fresh to the team, and it's about getting them involved with the people that have been here like 5, 6, 7 years, getting them so that you've got a good solid unit. And I think your external activities, whatever you're doing, are probably the best way to go about it.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned Leicester there, because saw today that their women actually just didn't train today and played rounders instead. And they just spent the afternoon on the training ground with rounders, bats and cones, just basically like high school PE for some kind of team bonding. I've noticed that they've done that a lot actually since they changed the manager kind of at the end of last year. So it's interesting you mentioned Leicester when I've noticed that
as well, aren't they? So that's maybe that sort of has played into it. They've actually they're doing a lot better now than they were possibly earlier on in the season or last season. So maybe, who knows, maybe that's a part of it, them doing things like that. But I definitely agree that things like that are really, really important in a team, because we see each other sort of 3 times a week, but we spend all of that time training or playing. It's important, I think, to do other things, whether that's going out for the day or whether it's doing actual like team building activities. And it is really important to sort of bring the team together. One, so that you sort of get to know each other a lot more and you can have a laugh at your friends then as well as the teammates. But also sort of touching on what Gareth was talking about earlier about sort of like trusting each other, and the better you know someone, hopefully the more you can trust them. And I think that's really important within the team. Me and James have been talking about stuff like that quite a lot recently at FC, because that's sort of the environment we want to create. And James was telling me about a book that he's been reading, all about German football, and they talk a lot about Manuel Neuer, and talking about how in order for his teammates to gain trust in him with his ball at with the ball at his feet, they actually cancelled all his goalkeeper training for like 6 months, and he didn't do any goalkeeper training, and all he did was train with the outfield players as if he was an outfield player. And not only did obviously he get better with the ball at his feet, but also his teammates could see how good he was with the ball at his feet. And that's sort of what built up the trust in him. And we all sort of know that that's what we sort of view him as typically, don't we? When you talk about Neuer, you think of him with the ball at his feet. And I think sort of from what James was telling me about this book he's been reading, a lot of it was all about building up that trust between him and his defenders and him and the team. And instead of having that separate, the goalkeepers are over there training and the players are over there training, it was like, let's bring them together, let's get them to know each other better and trust each other. And I think things like that are really important.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to touch a little bit more on sort of the trust aspect, because obviously, Matt, this will link into sort of your line of work as well, about sort of that trust and that planning. Is there ever times, I mean, it might not have even been with FC, but in general, where you may have worked with either, footballers or clients, where you've maybe found it difficult in terms of them trusting you? And that's not to say like in a bad way. It's the fact like they might sort of say one thing when they're not too sort of educated and clued up. And obviously with you, being in the know, is there ever times where that's maybe like a bit of a challenge and you have to sort of maybe strip things back or go about it a different way?
Yeah, I think it's a conversation I've had to have a couple of times, and it's not even always necessarily them trusting me. It's I've got to trust them, because if I'm going through the assessments and they're not showing any signs of pain, if they don't tell me, I don't know what's going through their head. I could be doing something that's causing them so much pain, but they can just sit with a stern face and then go, yeah, it's fine. And then I think that's where it comes into it on both sides. I always try and be open and honest with them as to what we're doing, how long things might take. And obviously you've just got to try and expect that back. I think it's a massively important aspect of the work that we're doing. And there's obviously times where people will push the boundaries of what's happening. And it's just important to, like you said, strip it back and tell them, look, we need to sort of be serious here and say, if this is causing an issue, then we need to know, and then we can fix it. And yeah, just go from there. Really, it's a difficult one to approach sometimes, because you don't know how it's going to be reacted to.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I want to sort of finish the last bit then on sort of goalkeeper training, Elsie, and sort of, I don't want to like go on another half an hour, but obviously, you take goalkeepers, and obviously tonight we've talked a lot about mindset and mentality. Do you want to talk to us about sort of maybe working with that? Because obviously, as we all know in football in general, obviously goalkeepers come under loads of pressure, because obviously, a lot of the time if there's a mistake, it usually ends up in the back of the net. And a conversation we've had even with players, we've had like strikers on the pitch and they'll say, well, we don't get, as much stick because if we miss 10 shots out of 20, nobody says anything. But whereas I think a goalkeeper mindset and mentality, we had the Arsenal third choice keeper on about a month ago, and she was sort of talking about that. But how do you maybe, even from a playing or a coaching point of view, maybe look at sort of helping with that or working on that?
Yeah, I think as a goalkeeper, it's the hardest job on the pitch. It's the hardest mentally. You can't get around it. Either you're sort of ecstatic or you're miserable, and there's usually not really an in between, because you've either saved an amazing shot or you've let a shot in, and that's sort of how it's always going to be as a goalkeeper. So you've got to be mentally strong to be a goalkeeper. I think if you're not, it's not the right position for you. So I think that's the first thing is as a goalkeeper yourself and as a goalkeeper coach, sort of talking, especially dealing with young players, you've got to make sure they've got that mentality, or try and build that mentality up, and make it as strong as possible. Otherwise, they're probably not going to succeed in the long run. I think as a coach, I think the most important thing, and I know we've touched on it a lot already while we've been talking, is that communication. The better you know your goalkeepers, the better you can sort of deal with them, and you sort of always know how they're going to react to certain things and how they're going to be after a game and what you might need to say to them to pick them up. And I think that all comes down to that communication, making sure you know them well enough. If they've let a shot in that they should have saved, how are they going to react to that, and how should you as their coach react to that? Is it the time to start screaming and shouting at them, or is it time to just stay quiet, maybe have a quiet word with them after the game? It might even, I find sometimes it's the case that I can tell usually whether my goalkeeper knows that she's made a mistake or not, and knows what she should have done differently. So sometimes I don't even need to say anything to her if I'm watching her in training or in a match. I can tell if she knows that she should have done better. And as long as I know that she knows what she should have done, I just stay quiet. I think, look, there's no need for me to get involved and make it worse and bring it up again and start touching on it, because it might just sort of make them lose their confidence. It might make them miserable. But then I know the times that I do need to step in and say, look, then maybe this didn't go to plan. Let's try this. Let's work on this at training, to sort of build that back up again. And then I think a big part of it as well is making sure that if there are things that are going wrong, practice and practice and practice and practice and build that confidence up. I've had it this season and in seasons in the past where your goalkeepers never made a mistake for weeks and weeks and weeks, and all of a sudden they make the same mistake 5 times in a row, and you're just like, how has this happened? It's never happened before. And I think I find that picking that up in training and sort of doing it again and again and again and again and sort of turning it into a habit almost, you can build up their confidence in that specific aspect, and you'll find that it won't happen again. So yeah, I think all of those things are really important as a goalkeeper, being strong mentally, but also having a coach that knows you well and knows how to sort of be around you, and knowing that you can talk to each other if you need to as well. I think it's really important. You've got quite a close relationship as a goalkeeper and a goalkeeper coach, because a lot of it's sort of one-to-one work or very small group work most of the time, and you get to know each other, and I think that's really important.
Yeah. Gareth, anything from you before we finish?
No, I think kind of Elsie's kind of covered everything there.
Yeah, perfect. Right, well, on that note, then we'll wrap it up. So thank you to everyone for tuning in, and we will see you on the next show on Thursday. Cheers.
Cheers. Thank you.